Welcome to Separate Together, a podcast exploring what happens when we change not just how families separate, but how we think about legal separations altogether. Hosted by me, practicing family lawyer Melissa Bourgeois.
And by me, definitely not a lawyer, Cody Dub.
And just a quick disclaimer, we like to remind our listeners that this podcast should not be taken as legal advice and it is for informational purposes only. Because everyone's relationship is different, please consult a legal professional if you have any questions.
Today we have something very different on Separate Together. My first non-Melissa guest. I am talking to Cassandra Davis, who is a counselor at Carter's Counselling in Saskatchewan, and I got to see Cassie speak in Vancouver earlier this fall. She was talking about attachment style in the context of divorce, and it was so revelatory to me that I just thought I need to have Cassie on. I need to lock her in a little audio room and ask her all of my very important questions. So Cassie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate it.
Yes, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So I thought, since I know you via the divorce lens, via that kind of world, maybe we could back up just a little bit and you could explain to our listeners what attachment style is in the context of your work.
Yeah, so attachment theory goes all the way back, obviously, into the 50s. So, it wasn't something I obviously found. But our attachment system is developed from, the time we were born and up until around age 12, it pretty much gets solidified. However, it can shift through different relationships we have, romantically or non. So, just because you are securely attached going into a relationship doesn't always mean you're going to be securely attached coming out of it. So our attachment system is quite much like our nervous system. It's how we protect ourselves and it's how we connect to those around us. So if we perceive the bond to our parent as something that is stable and consistent, we will typically have a secure attachment. We only need that bond to one caregiver, our primary caregiver, to develop that. However, most people do not develop a secure attachment. We land into the anxious or the avoidant. And that doesn't mean that we had bad parents. It just means that the perception of the bond wasn't solid. So if you come out anxiously attached, which I used to be, that means that we have that inconsistent attachment. So we are more focused on the fact of hypervigilant to our parents' behaviors, right? So we know the footstep, we know the sound, we do all these things, and we're much more of a people pleaser, and we absolutely fear rejection and abandonment. Now, if we are an avoidant, they're both in the instinct, so they do share some things. They both have fear, is what it's rooted in, but their fear is actually in the loss of autonomy, and they can fear abandonment, but they just definitely fear closeness. And they were raised more in a sense where their needs weren't met in a way that they knew that their emotions were too big for their family, right? So if they shared something, they knew mom wasn't going to be able to receive that. So they just learned that emotions don't really matter and let's just stick to the facts.
Okay, so it's really those three kind of categories. And I'm totally surprised right off the bat that secure is rare, that's not kind of the default. I mean, How naive of me, right?
Yeah, anxious and avoidant kind of take up most of it, and everyone's kind of a combination. So just because when I'm working with someone, I like to look at the main attachment they have, so we can do some different quizzing and testing to see what is their dominant, because basically no one is 100% one of them. So someone can be very securely attached, let's say in the workplace, right? But then when they get into a relationship, their anxious attachment comes out. So we all have a bit of all of them. There's just a dominant one.
That's interesting. So when you're looking at someone's kind of profile, you're getting a picture of kind of how they are in the different facets of their lives and then where they exist on that spectrum between anxious, avoidant, or possibly secure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in the context of divorce, you're building two profiles, or maybe not even divorce, but I imagine you would do a lot of couples counseling then?
I do a lot of couples counseling, and then Katie and I, my boss, we do a lot of mediation or therapeutic mediation. So really just trying to bring two parties back together, whether it be bring them back together in relationship or however that looks. But yeah, I do a lot of couples counseling.
Which is how we kind of came to you. Sorry, I apologize. All the fire trucks are going past, of course. But Melissa and I had the chance to watch you and Katie speak at a conference we went to, and it's so interesting because you guys had all of the language for what we see with our clients. Again, because we're just so different. We work in kind of a mediative process, but we do get both parties, which is rare, and then we are kind of assisting them through this process. And listening to you both speak, it was like, of course, like, why would you not introduce this angle, and why would you not have that obvious kind of synergy between your work as a counselor, her work as a mediator, asking, clients to come into these really difficult discussions and her facilitating them, but you giving them the language and the kind of self-awareness to be successful is like such a no-brainer, and yet you guys are pretty rare in this space.
It is, yeah. We actually just did a 3-hour mini series with a bunch of lawyers actually, and their like light bulbs were just all going off, and like they were pinging different clients, and once you understand it, you can kind of just see it. I don't like to have people live through the label of like, I'm an anxiously attached human being. But once you understand what's happening, you kind of also reduce the shame around it, right? Because now you understand, hey, that's just my nervous system responding to either rejection or abandonment, or the fear of the lack of autonomy, right? And we can work on it differently rather than being like, finger pointing, they make me feel like this, and then I have to do this thing, right?
Yeah, I think, I guess for the purposes of this conversation, it might help just to narrow in on that kind of mediation process and how that works. So when you are working with Katie, if you know she's getting ready to facilitate mediation or possibly a few mediation sessions, when you come in and work with clients, like, that the separation is happening, so obviously you're adjusting your lens. It's less like we're working to kind of maintain this relationship, but transition this relationship through now to the other side. Maybe that's co-parenting, maybe that's just minimizing trauma for two parties who are going to ultimately go their separate way. But what does that look like from your perspective, knowing that they have to address a lot of really difficult questions, and they have to make a lot of decisions in a very short time period? Usually we're selling a house, we might be moving kids from schools, we might be, all the things that come with a separation. I'm curious how you take the very large language concept idea of attachment style and put it through this frame of like, how is this going to benefit you both and set you up to successfully co-parent?
Yeah, so one of the things that Katie and I like to focus on, especially when there's children involved, is that this relationship is shifting, it's not ending, right? So we are no longer going to be husband and wife or partners, but we are still partners in a different lens, and our attachment system isn't going anywhere. Right. So especially because this person I was very, very connected to. So my attachment system is going to be on alert, specifically again, because in that mediation situation, you're basically turning on that system heavily, right? Because the anxious person doesn't want to feel rejection. They don't want to feel abandoned, right? And they need fast answers, right? They don't deal in space, where avoidants need that time, and they don't like to be overwhelmed, and they like everything factual. So their styles are going to come out heavily when you put them into that room. So typically what happens, Katie obviously does the intake, and then after like usually the first session, if she notices that their communication is really just being hindered from the attachment, they will come to see me individually, and I kind of just teach them like, okay, look, this is what anxious attachment is. This is how it impacts our communication. This is different ways that we can work through regulating it. And then the same thing with the avoidant, and just kind of giving them the understanding and helping them advocate for space and slowing things down if necessary, which Katie's obviously really good at working with in the room. And that's kind of how we like to look at it, specifically if they're going to be co-parenting, because everyone has a toxic loop when they've been in a relationship for a long time, and it's just gonna be the same one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's why they're there.
Yeah, and it's almost more annoying because they're like, I'm not even married to you anymore, and I'm still in this same dynamic. So if we can help them understand that and shift that loop, specifically changing the way they communicate from that anxious and avoidant attachment, we can really impact what co-parenting can look like for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious too, because you mentioned kind of in the beginning that these are movable. If you're able to kind of do the work, I'm wondering like how often, because we have kind of a similar situation when we ask our clients to self-advocate, or when they start to kind of lay out their plans or step into the roles of co-parents, they have this kind of like aha moment, like, oh, this is going to be on us. Like, you're not going to tell us what to do. We have to decide, and we have to decide together. I'm curious for you with your clients if it's a similar moment where learning this about themselves is a powerful thing versus when it becomes like a predetermined, like, oh, I do this, so this is just what it's going to be. How do you navigate bringing them into self-awareness, but allowing them, or, you know, kind of enforcing the idea that this is movable and that through work we can make this work for us?
Mm-hmm. That's the main reason I work from an attachment-focused lens, right? Because attachment can be shifted. So I always tell people, like, if I had the cure for depression or I had the cure for anxiety, you'd be waiting 7 years to see me to do this, right? So that's kind of why I really take the attachment lens, because we can do the work and we can shift it. I always ask for permission, but I will share my own side, right? I'm adopted, which basically means I didn't have a hope in heck at being securely attached regardless. So I was severely anxiously attached, and I'll share them with that, right? Like, this is what it used to look like and this is how it feels. And if we can do some of the work, right, we can really experience a different life altogether. So kind of just giving them a little bit of a backstory, I find, can really empower them in a way, because a lot of people come into the space and just look at us therapists like we apparently have magic wands and our life are all together, and they're really not, right? So as soon as we can like normalize it and kind of give them the understanding that like it's in your power to shift this, it's not me doing the work at all. What we do in this room is going to be important, but it's more so what you do with it outside of it. And if you can shift that lens, you no longer have to go into an anxious spiral. You no longer have to run and seek space and then have to come back and do all this stuff in general, let alone just in this space of co-parenting.
I'm curious if your clients, you know, when you find them in that mediative process, just based on what you're saying, if they look at this as an opportunity to kind of begin that process of maybe changing the way they look at things. Like, I know, again, because we deal with a really different subset of clients, they're for the most part pretty amicable. It sounds crazy, but like there is a lot of excitement and kind of hope. And through our process, even though they are getting separated, they're really optimistic about the future. They're feeling pretty good. They're feeling pretty grounded. Is it a similar situation where once you've kind of introduced them to this profile, they've started noticing these patterns in themselves? There's a little bit of like excitement, or almost like, oh, now that I know this, I have choice where I didn't feel it before?
There can be, and sometimes there isn't, right? Because sometimes then they're like, well, if they don't change, then it doesn't matter if I change, right? Where I have to try to really work with them that like our focus is actually just on our own nervous system. Yes, if they don't change, that's not going to change. We can still actually change how you react and you respond and how you feel, right? Because having those two intertwined nervous systems, pulling them apart is already going to be a trauma, right? And then trying to teach them that they can act differently, even if this one doesn't move, can be difficult at times. But some of them do get really excited knowing that, you know what, this relationship, it's not going to be different, but the next one gets to be, right? And even the relationship with myself gets to be very different, because anxiously attached people, as well as a subsection of the avoidance, because there's dismissive and fearful, they have a lot of negative self-talk, right? And their self-worth is highly dependent on other people's opinions. So even just being able to empower one side of them with that can really change how they feel about the separation going forward and how they feel about themselves now as a single.
That's interesting. For your clients who maybe are not in a mediative process yet but are working on staying together, is it the case that they're like this kind of push-pull between opposite or avoidant and anxious personalities? I mean, this may be like a totally silly question, but like, can it ever work? Like, can they be complementary in the sense that like, if you know this about each other, you're committed to working on this together, can you use your, you know, if you are anxious, can you use it to really bolster someone's avoidant or negative self-talk personality and be like, hey, I'm really good at like really verbalizing my anxieties. I'm going to funnel these into like bolstering your self-opinion, and we're going to make this work?
Absolutely. Just because someone is in an anxious and avoidant relationship, like, doesn't mean it's going to fail, right? It's one of the most common relationship patterns we see. And I like to actually tell people there is really good things about being an avoidant. It means you're probably really good at working on your own, right? You don't need a whole team. You're really self-reliant. You are sure of yourself in a good way, right? You can be factual. Like, you don't need emotions. You can think in black and white, which can be beneficial to what career you're in or certain situations. As well as being an anxiously attached person, we need those people, right? They are natural people pleasers. They're really good at room reading. They're really good at making people feel good around them. They're just not really good at doing it for themselves, right? So absolutely letting them understand and create that space where they can each say like, hey, this is actually how you can sit by yourself, right? Because anxiously attached people don't do that well, where avoidance really value their alone time. They can actually teach each other a lot of things if it can be done without defense.
I see. Yeah, that sounds like kind of the key there. Because I can imagine like listening to you talk about these kind of personality traits that would be associated with these styles of attachment. I feel like I see that dynamic play out in our couples as well. There's often someone who, you know, like exactly like you said, is very factual, is very evidence-based, will take the lead financially, will drive a lot of the household decisions. And then maybe someone who is more anxious or more people-pleasing will do a lot more of the domestic care, a lot of the nurturing work. And then when they cleave, it's like you kind of have to borrow the other person's style a little bit so that you can make two kind of holistic households, or you can build up that part of yourself that you were relying on for someone else. It's a really interesting way. I think it's a really beautiful way to look at attachment style, because it takes the sting out of it a little bit and makes these kind of positive traits or effects of that really noticeable. I'm curious, because so many of our clients will then move into co-parenting, how different it is, like if you have an anxious attachment style in your relationship, then when you look at like say mothering, is that like a pretty automatic jump, or is it are these relationships totally different, your mothering relationship versus your romantic relationship?
They're not totally different, right? Because we only have one nervous system. So when it's triggered, it's turned on. But we can have different styles in different areas of our life. So just because we're anxiously attached romantically doesn't mean we're going to be anxiously attached so much in parenting. But you usually will see a little bit of leaking, right? So like for me, for example, I was definitely more hovering of my children, right? I needed them close. And that, you know, kind of comes from my anxious style. I needed them right beside me, where my co-parent was definitely more avoidant. He was like, let them be free. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, right? Because he values independence and those sorts of things. So it leaks. It doesn't mean that you're going to be for sure or not at all, but we only have one nervous system. So it kind of depends on what that looks like for that person and how secure they are in that role as well.
Interesting. Do you find that when you've kind of delivered a mediated couple through to the other side, they come back and they want that parenting assistance?
We have a lot of couples who come back to do co-parenting work with us. Not even always both of them, but one of them will come back and be like, hey, the things you said, I can really see. I want to be different in this relationship. I want to learn how to understand her or him. I want myself and be different in a future relationship, or even just for myself. So we don't always get back both parties. We often do get one back, though, for sure, that really it hit them and they're like, okay. But as we say, it's always up to your ability to self-reflect. So if you just want to finger point, or you don't think anything that we've said is real, you're not coming back. But usually there's one in their room that's like, that explains everything. Let me just explore this further. But like, as Katie will tell you as well, we call ourselves the one-stop shop for a reason. So we do have a lot of youth therapists. We have the mediation. We have the co-parenting. We have all of it in one place. So we kind of like to get the whole family in, because again, divorce isn't a one-time situation. It's something that's felt over and over and over. So being able to have a really supportive team and environment to help you through all of those transitions, we think is really important. So at Carter's, we have everybody for the whole family.
Yeah, you sure do. It's incredible. It's one of the few kind of places I've seen that has done that. Like we make a ton of referrals out. You know, we have financial advisors, we have child psychologists, family counselors. Again, we don't do really high conflict, so no kind of court mandated psychologists, but like it's shocking how piecemeal everything is. And again, like we already discussed, this is a really acute period of stress. To be able to take that kind of holistic approach and be like, hey, you know, we're asking you to do a lot of work, but we're also going to be really supportive about it. It's just incredible. It makes all the difference in the world. I am curious about something else that you mentioned that I wanted to ask. Like, again, we're very different in the sense that our clients are relatively amicable. They are also looking for a one-stop shop. They might not need as much help, but when you get clients who, are going to need some mediation, they're going to need some co-parenting assistance, they might even be doing, a bit of psychology or counseling for their kids and for themselves, how receptive are they to that much intervention? Like, to that much kind of all hands on deckness?
That is a great question, and it varies, right? Yeah. Some people come in and they are so hurt and upset and defensive that they're like, I don't need anything. I just need this person gone. And once that happens, everything's going to be fine and I'm going to build everything on my own. Yeah. And then we have other people who almost just melt and they're like, you're going to be able to help all of us for the long term, right? And they're very excited by the fact that it's just one place. Obviously, we maintain client confidentiality, so I'm not working with the like the counselor sees the kids, right? I'm not in all these things. We do try to keep it all separate, but at the same time, with the right form signed, we can actually all come together and support the family as a whole, seeing how that looks. So it's kind of up to them, and we try to encourage them. But yeah, it can be very, very dependent on how the situation looks.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I mean, I ask because from our perspective, especially me in like a client relations role, it's always an interesting conversation with people because they come in with their preconceived notions of what divorce is going to look like. And you have some who are like, it's going to be lawyers and it's going to be a fight and I'm going to get this, this, and this is what I want and this is what's going to happen. And very quickly, they are disabused of that notion when they begin speaking, consulting with other lawyers. They get a sense of what the numbers and the timeline is going to look like and the effect on the family. And so that's really helpful for us because we can take a really realistic look and be like, this is what you're saying you want and this is what that might look like. And they can come back down to like maybe not amicable, but like collaborative and reasonable. And it really changes the mind frame going into the process because they know what to expect, what the outcome is going to be, and that this really is not the place for the work that you would do, the emotional work. We're here to make these decisions and we're here to make a plan. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you handle it when one party is like totally game, is ready to do the work, and the other party is just not interested at all, but they know these changes are coming? Like, we always say whenever we have one client who is really reluctant, you don't get to not engage. You don't get to just stay married. I understand like the head in the sand, the ostrich is deeply appealing, but you don't get to do that to someone else. So you kind of have to engage. What you do get to choose is what your separation looks like. Is it going to be nasty and expensive and emotional and devastating? Or is it going to be affordable, timely, and, pragmatic? Do you have like a similar structure in place in your approach where you can say you don't get to kind of not engage, especially when there's kids involved?
Just let everybody know what it's going to look like long term. So we talk about kind of future things where we really like to talk to people about, been a recent study where divorce actually isn't what impacts the child, it's the co-parenting, right? Like, is divorce an adverse childhood experience? For sure. Right? Kids remember it. But if we can actually develop co-parenting that feels safe and secure and like a breath of fresh air for these kids, it actually doesn't impact them as much as it would if they had terrible co-parenting. Usually most people, once they hear that it's based upon the co-parenting, they will circle back to try to learn what that means, because at the heart of it, most parents do feel bad that they're not being able to maintain one home for their children. But when we give them the information that if we can make good co-parents, this isn't actually going to be the end of the world for these kids, a lot of them do engage. There's always going to be those ones that are like, absolutely not. They're angry and they're hurt and they're not at that place to do the work. And we just kind of let them know that like right now resentment's guiding a lot of these things and anger is definitely at the forefront. And once that comes down, because anger is a masking emotion, right? We're here, right? It's not, you can't come back next year or come talk to us in 4 months or anything like that. So we kind of just let them know that we're going to be a safe place for them to land, but co-parenting is going to be what impacts their children long term, and that is up to them, right?
What do you mean, like when you say good co-parents, in a nutshell, or like elevator pitch, what makes good co-parents?
Or typically anyone who's not going to triangulate the child. So where the child knows that they are not going to become the parent's place to land, right? Where they have conversations that are outside of what the children need to know. They're not told, hey, can you call dad for this? Because dad never answers when I text him. So that child's doing those things where the child knows that when mom and dad are in the same room, there's absolute tension and they are pulled in both situations, or where they're used as a pawn or manipulated against each other. That's the kind of stuff that we try to really coach against, because triangulation or parentification are two things that, if they happen in youth, are typically going to lead to really hard situations and relationships as adults. So if you've been parentified, which basically just means you become your parent's peer, right? You typically don't have healthy romantic relationships as an adult, because you really learn that your feelings don't have a space. You become very hypervigilant. You didn't get the chance to really learn your own nervous system because you were so involved in your parents. Or when you've been triangulated, so your parents have formed a little team against you and you're on team mom today and on team dad tomorrow, right? And you get rewarded based on those behaviors, that really impacts them. So we kind of also hit them with that. Like, do you want your daughter to grow up to find relationships that will repeat this pattern for her?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, it's such a, like, the approach that we take when we're building a parenting plan with our clients, because we're also dividing the property, we're setting the support payments, we're looking at how the resources from one house are flowing now into two houses. We can do that in a very avoidant or detached way, where we look at the numbers and then we look at the ages of the children and we kind of forecast, like, here are the decisions we are going to make. How can we address these kind of up front and right now, so that we avoid exactly what you're talking about, where you're like, well, dad said he didn't want to pay for ballet, so I guess I'm paying. You're having these conversations with the kiddo instead of with dad, and now kiddo feels guilty about wanting to do ballet or horseback riding or hockey, and hockey's so expensive, and it's the driving, and it's all of these things. It's so interesting, because we don't talk about that. We allude to it and we try and build out a plan that acknowledges that it's the default, but we try and build it from a way that is proactive and pragmatic. And we are successful because our clients are successful. But I will, obviously concede that, like, you are doing the very important other side of that, which is naming when it does not go right, what is actually happening. And I have just heard so many people, especially, come into our offices and they don't want to do it. They do not want that to happen, and it just happens inevitably. I mean, we have the best intentions with our kids, we absolutely do, but it's such a default when you cannot communicate with your other parent to have a liaise, a go-between, and that unfortunately becomes your child. And I just think, like, you have such an incredible way of labeling it, of knowing when it's going to happen. I'm curious how you address that in your counseling sessions. Again, like, you do not need to go into specifics or details, but, like, we build, our plan with a very detailed kind of questionnaire. And again, like, we can couch it in those Section 7 expenses, in, like, what's coming down the pipeline financially. And just the kind of, like, crumminess of dealing with numbers removes a lot of the emotionality. We're just looking at what this is going to cost and then building a way to talk about it that is hopefully quite neutral. How do you approach those difficult, the cost of the sports, the cost of the day camps, the childcare, the driving to and from, the social element? Like, how do you approach those from a therapeutic space?
I'm a straight shooter. So
yes, you are.
Yeah, I was like, oh no. I really thought about answering this in, like, some kind of different way, but I'm just going to be super honest. I'm just straight to the point. right? So I just let them know that, like, hey, this form of communication is not going to be acceptable. This is where this is going to bring you. That's your choice. I'm not going to stop you or, drop you as a client or anything like that. But like, this is what we're working with right now. And it's because you're triggered, right? So you're responding and communicating these ways because you're upset, you're triggered, you're bothered, and you're going into an old pattern. So we can address that and we can make this a different thing for you, or you're going to keep doing this. Either way, your choice. But I'm going to tell you what's going to probably happen from this. So I don't really take too much of a therapeutic approach when it comes to that, just because I just hit you with the truth and then it's up to you, right? So.
But I think, like, from the sounds of it, you're acknowledging something or hitting them with the truth, which they may not be aware of, but then you're also explaining why they're doing it, which I think is so important, because that judgment, that shame, they don't have to carry that. It's not, again, like I've talked on this podcast before, but like I'm raising a neurodivergent child. So we do so much work around regulating our nervous system, understanding our neurodivergence, how it changes how we react and approach every single scenario in our life. And again, as parents, we opted to get a diagnosis because it's really hard to move through the world reacting and not knowing why. And the guilt and shame and confusion around that is really painful. And I think like there's such a, an obvious connection between what you're talking about. So as much as it would be difficult to hear that truth, I think you do the perfect job of then explaining why it's happening and then presenting.
Yeah. Like anxiously attached people, specifically when they're triggered, even more so by their partners, they go into a rapid communication, right? So that's where it's like text, because they can't sit in emotional space. So physical space or emotional space are going to trigger you, right? Whether you're very front brain aware of it or not, that gets upsetting. So that's often where we see that over communication or that over functioning, where they'll really draw the child in, because they'll send 7 texts and dad didn't answer, and then it's like, hey, can you ask dad, because he's not responding, right? Where if dad is more on the avoidant thing, you've now just turned his nervous system on because he just got 7 of these texts. He knows what this dance looks like. He's taking the space, and now we've thrown this little child into this because they also know what dad's saying on the other side. Like, your mom's blowing up my phone again, and right, and they're just trying to bring everybody down. So if we can teach both sides of how to communicate differently through that, because we're going to get triggered. We're going to go into one of our old patterns, right? But if I can get one of you to dance differently, then that child doesn't have to enter.
I like that. Is it, I'm making an obvious assumption here, but is it the case that when you are feeling like you need to pepper someone with text, or you are so uncomfortable sitting in the space, is the work then being able to sit in it, building that kind of capacity to be uncomfortable, be, unsure, and just let it ride?
Yeah, anxiously attached people need reassurance, right? They need to know that you are there. Whether you are their co-parent or their friend, or like, so they do get very, very rapid, and they don't name their own feelings well. They're very good at sitting outside in other people's, but their own, they don't have a lot of capacity for, because they're just looking for someone to say, we're okay, right? So for them, it's that a lot of people are like, okay, so you're going to teach me to never get triggered again? And I'm like, no, what? You're going to get triggered again, right? But we're going to grow your emotional window to sit in that discomfort or in that feeling, but also change our communication pattern, because anxiously attached individuals often communicate from a passive aggressive. They're just putting their toe in the water to see what you would say about that or how you're going to react to it, right? Which is very triggering for the avoidant, because again, they don't deal in emotions, but they're getting a mixed signal, and they're like, what are you really after? And then they retreat, which further fires up that anxiously attached person. So if we can change even just the way you two speak to one another, regardless of your emotions, that also can have a massive impact, right?
Do you have like a vocabulary that I assume you do, like a vocabulary, or is it like really person to person to person? Like, do you know what kind of words are going to hit, like how to kind of ease them into this process of pausing, labeling their emotions? Maybe it's get up, get a walk, like someone safe to call. Like, do you have, I assume you have processes to kind of address this?
Yeah, so anxiously attached people go into what's called a protest behavior, right? So they often will go kind of like a child tantrum, right? When they feel like their needs aren't getting met or they're not being responded to or they're being rejected. So giving them the understanding of what is your protest? What does that feel like? Because you know it, right? You know when you're going into it, you know how you're acting. So getting them to just understand, like, this is my protest, right? What is my unmet need, right? Because we all have like 5 main needs as humans for the most part. There's more than that, but there's the 5 main ones. So then how can I go meet that need for myself right now? Because I can't put that on my co-parent, right? Because usually co-parenting relationship is very different than our marriage relationship, and it gets crisscross applesauce specifically in the beginning, right? Or when we add in that new girlfriend or boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And things get real different. So really just teaching them what that protest behavior looks like. How does it feel? How can I name it? And then how can I go and meet my needs? Because again, anxiously attached people spend so much time meeting other people's needs. They don't even know what that looks like or feels like. They just go do that next thing that maybe they've seen somebody else do or they've heard about. And again, for the avoidant, we teach them that space is okay, right? It's okay that you need to go and get away from that flooding of an emotion. You have to come back.
Yeah. How do you return?
Right. And teaching them, because they're shamed often, right? Or they're fearful. So we have to kind of get them to work through those things as well. But teaching them that you can't actually just say, I'm not dealing with this, because now you've lit the anxiously attached person on fire. Right? Yep. So kind of getting them to understand that, but creating that space where they can set a boundary and say, hey, I'm flooded. Anything I say or do right now is not going to be a decision I'm going to be happy with. And then going and utilizing that space, but not just going and running away from an emotion, going and sitting with it and also doing the same thing. What is coming up for me right now? How can I show up for myself in this moment? And then how can I come back so I can co-parent well?
Makes so much sense. I'm curious, just based on what you're saying, I don't know how online you are. I am a notoriously online person, but how does it hurt or help you when people are throwing around terms like gray rock or narcissist or these things that then you have to come in and be like, okay, gray rock is actually just like, we're not doing this. Our clients come in with all kinds of vocabulary, all kinds of research, all kinds of biases and best friend accounts, and this happened to, and we have to do a bit of dismantling in the beginning and then kind of take a look at like what is actually happening and where you fit in it. I'm so curious like how you navigate that, because I can imagine it would just be rampant.
So I feel like narcissist is the most overused term in general. Yeah. Because narcissism is actually a diagnosable mental health condition, right? Like literally. So like if you're on any of those, are we dating the same guy or any of that stuff, it's all, he's a narcissist, he's a narcissist, he's a narcissist. And I'm like, there's no freaking way. Like, and it's great to make yourself feel better by calling someone a narcissist and then you don't have to own your side of the relationship maybe. I'm not sure. But I work with a lot of men because I'm solution focused and so are they. I work with a lot of men because of how direct I am. I have a lot of them that come in that are like, I'm a narcissist. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Interesting.
Right? Because they've been told over and over and over, you're a narcissist, you're a narcissist, you're a narcissist. And then they just absorb that diagnosis and they're like, I'm here because I'm a narcissist. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be the easiest session of your life because no, you're not, right? Do
Merry
we have
Christmas.
Narcissistic traits? Sure. Everybody does. Right? Everybody's selfish at some point and all those things, but it's very, very, very overused, as well as like gaslighting, right? People are always being gaslit and I'm just like, that's not what that is, right? Like the moment, and again, it's based on self-reflection and so many people are just very easy at like throwing these labels out rather than sitting and looking at like, what is my part? And again, anyone who's actually been abused, my heart goes out to them. I don't pretend that there isn't narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse or things like that. But we can't just go around labeling people with things because it actually has a large impact on them. And I'm sitting on the other side with a lot of male clients who are terrified now because they are a narcissist.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's, it's a symptom of where we're getting this information, where everything is condensed into a 30 or 60-second clip, and we've gotten the Coles notes and we think that's sufficient, and then we go on our way. Melissa and I talk about this really often because a really interesting facet of our work is that we will see clients kind of address the immediate concerns, housing, co-parenting schedule, finances, and then a year or 9 months later, they'll come back and they'll actually sign their formal documents, but they've been co-parenting for 9 or 12 months, for the most part pretty successfully. And it's interesting because we almost get like a little window into the work that they've done. And if we've done our job and they're doing their jobs, it's like we've seen the kind of manifestation of that work. And it's really incredible to watch people change the way they co-parent from the way they parented as a married unit. It can happen. I think that's a surprising message that probably really resonates with you as well, because you see the fruits of your combined labor, and it is possible. People change all the time. People are constantly changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the one thing that Katie and I always like to say is like, let's build hope, right? Like, let's build who are you now, right? What do you want life to feel like and be like? And what can we do that's going to grow that for you? Because if we can help you become the best version of yourself, that's going to be a direct impact on that child as well as your ability to co-parent. And even if they don't change, right? They might never change, but you are now in your own and you're creating a new version of you, and we want to grow that part of you. So
is that a big part of your work? Like, is that really helpful for people to understand how, or to kind of like, I don't know, I mean, again, vision board, dreamscape, manifest how they want to move through the world?
Mm-hmm. It is, right? Because a lot of people have an understanding of who they want to be, right? Or what they want it to look like. And I always tell people in my practice that something you're inspired by, you already have, right? That's how I look at it. If you're looking at somebody and you're like, I really like that, you've already got that somewhere in you, or else you wouldn't be intrigued or drawn to it, right? Yeah. Like, I'm terrified of heights and bears. I've never watched someone do a mountain video. That's great.
So it's in your future?
I want to figure that out, right? But so I always kind of say it's in you somewhere. We just need to uncover some of these things and heal some of these things. And some things aren't going to heal, but being able to develop your self-worth and your understanding of your attachment, we can grow you into someone that you're really proud of, right? And there's a lot of shame in divorce. There's a lot of guilt in divorce. And we have to go through that. We have to sit in that gross part. And a lot of women too, right, as they're learning what alone time looks like when their kids are at their dad's. There's a lot of shame that goes along with that because they're living their life and maybe they shouldn't be, right? So helping them grow that is one of our greatest joys for sure.
That's actually really interesting. That leads me to kind of another question that I had. Do you find with women, you mentioned that attachment style is largely based on kind of your nervous system and how you've typically responded and the relationships you have. Can it also be the case that when you experience a change in identity, when you become a mother or when your kids leave the house or you're no longer a wife, like, can that affect your attachment style as well? That change in identity, are those two things connected?
They can be. A lot of things can impact our attachment system, specifically life experiences, right? So we can, become a single person and all of a sudden be very afraid of dating, right? We're very avoidant now because we've been hurt. So now I need to protect myself differently, right? Or if I'm anxiously attached, I'm very aware of how I look. How are they feeling? I'm very focused in on them instead of me, because it's like, if I can just please this one, I can heal the last, right? So we can be shifted by a lot of different things, but it's all, at the end of the day, it's just protection. How am I choosing to protect myself and fearing that connection? Right? So changing your self-worth and changing the way you connect will really change everything for you. And again, we can be avoidant from one relationship and move into another one, but it's starting to teach them, like, what is it for me? Because a lot of people always think about, how am I making that person feel specifically when they go back into dating, right? How do they feel about me? They don't really sit and think, how do I feel around them?
Yeah, that's so important. That's something I've noticed, in my social circle, like, absolutely. That question of like, you know, and I think too, a lot of what I've heard is women or men who are carrying a lot of the remnants of that previous relationship, like they go in with almost like a list of like, here's what I'm not going to accept or I'm not going to do anymore. And I'm like, whoa, like we haven't even met hypothetical other person yet. We like that. Why are we starting with lists and will not and won'ts and green light and red light when the world is your oyster? You know, there's opportunity, but they, you know, almost as a protection kind of have to create like a yes, no list going into this new uncomfortable space.
And there's just usually hurts behind it, right? And we haven't addressed those hurts. But a lot of times too, when people don't actually address what happened in their relationships, they don't realize that they're going into the next one recreating the exact same thing they left, right? They're actually, the spark is typically actually a bad thing. If you feel a spark, it's something old.
Really?
It's
like if you feel a connection?
That big spark that everyone looks for is often an old thing being triggered, right?
That's
and our
so
brain is
interesting.
Like, there it is. There's that person, you know them. We can do it different this time, and then we won't have to feel the pain of dad, or we won't have to feel the pain of our ex-husband. This is it. The spark. Sparks are not good.
Wow, that is the hottest take I think I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's a chemical reaction in your brain that is not something good, right?
Interesting.
And I'm going to throw my little best friend under the bus here. I have a guy best friend, and he's out there dating, and this girl didn't feel the spark, and he was like, good. You shouldn't. And I was like, that's my boy.
Yeah, I taught you well.
Yeah, he was just like, yeah, and I was like, well, good. Like,
that's
and
so
if you're going to be chasing that, you're just chasing this chemical reaction in your brain. It doesn't mean that this person's actually a good match for you.
No,
it just means that there's something firing that probably isn't good.
That makes perfect sense. I've just never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody's, you know, looking for that. And then again, it depends on when you come out on the other side too. Getting comfortable, exactly like you said, we're at an age and a stage, if we've left a previous relationship where it is like the real work is sitting in those emotions and labeling them. And that is not sparky. That is decidedly boring and the opposite of that, you know, ignition is that exactly like you said. That's funny.
Because a lot of relationships are lows and highs, right? And people actually connect that to passion. And again, it's because when it's in the high, all the dopamine and serotonin are ripping. And then in the low, right, they know the high's coming. And sometimes they'll create it.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's where they're comfortable, right? So again, those sparks aren't a good thing.
Right. They literally are exactly like you said, leading to fire. Do you know, you've talked a lot about how it's usually an anxious and an avoidant. What happens if it's too anxious? That gets together.
We don't typically see that relationship last long term. Off the hop, too anxiously attached people usually get pretty excited because the other person's also super externally focused. They're also very hyper fixated on you, right? And you think like this is finally going to be the answer, but you have to think about the passive aggressive communication and the protest behaviors. And neither one of them have the ability to sit in distance emotionally or physically. So it is just constant turmoil because they don't have the tools or the space. So they happen, but they're not as common and they typically don't last.
That's interesting because I feel like in the divorce space in particular, again, like maybe I'm just not seeing it right, but I do think there are some people, you know, especially as we're kind of getting them through this series, you know, the 6 months or whatever it's going to take for the dust to settle, where my advice sometimes is like, just stop talking to it. Like they cannot help each other. They circle each other like sharks. There's blood in the water and it's like anything, you know, Christmas, like, which of course makes sense. It's a big holiday, but like even the slightest things, you didn't bring the shirt that he wanted. You didn't, you know, buy the fruit snack at your house. You're this, and this. You're a narcissist. I feel like that is something that I see often is two people who just cannot stop and take a beat, where it would almost be helpful if one of them was avoidant and could not answer. But it's, you know, kind of the cliche of where you get like the boxes and boxes and boxes of text messages before the judge, and the judge is just like, no one has time for this. How do you have time for this? But you're saying that like you don't see that often. Well, so maybe it's not
anxiously attached people will do that over texting, over communicating, but they also are constantly, they don't see a fight or a rupture in the same way everybody else does. And not that they're outwardly knowingly that they're being toxic, but as long as you're talking to me, we're in connection.
Right.
So their brain doesn't take it in as such a bad thing because we're still communicating. So you will be working with two anxiously attached people, but often when it's like that, where they're just going at each other over and over and over, it can be a few things, but it could be that they're anxiously attached because, again, they don't see the constant back and forth is a bad thing, because that means we're still connected. Right. You're still talking to me, you're still worried, you're still invested, you're still responding, right? And as long as you're responding, we're okay.
Right.
Right. So they do create a lot of arguments just to stay in connection.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely, that makes sense. Even if they wouldn't say they wanted that connection or it's unwanted, it's their default.
It's just safety because we're still talking.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Are you here for me? Yeah.
That's interesting. When you're working with kids, I don't know if you do work with kids directly, or maybe not even kids, but like, let's take a lot of our kind of, like we would say in divorce, you know, at around 12, 13 is when we really take a look at the kind of interests of the child, at whose house they want to be at. Do you think, like, is that kind of also the age then where kids are becoming aware of like, hey, I don't really like when this happens, or I don't like when dad says this or mom says this, or I don't love that this is being asked of me, demanded of me? We see that as them deciding whose house I want to be at, or starting to kind of assert their preferences, their will, their autonomy. I assume that's kind of a natural thing that happens even for married individuals too, is like, is that kind of age where you might start to be aware of your kind of relational attachment styles as you're developing your own? Or is that like a gross, you know, as if people are that cognizant?
I try to avoid children at all costs.
Just
literally, when I was taking one of my child psychology classes, I even told my prof, I was like, just pass me and I promise I'll never talk to a kid.
But you have kids, don't you?
I have them. I like my own. I just try to avoid other people's.
It's fair.
And not because I don't like kids. It's because I don't like what happens to them, specifically in divorces, because often their voices aren't heard.
Yeah.
Right? And they're manipulated and they're twisted. And I'm dealing with two unhinged, unregulated adults who are just throwing the kid in to fix the kid, or they have the kid there saying something targeted to try to not be at dad's anymore, or any of those things. And because they don't have that fully developed front brain, I don't like working with them because it just triggers my heart too much. But yeah, right around the age of 12 and 13, that is for sure when they can start to develop the idea of like, where is emotional safety? Right? Yeah. Where do I feel like I can come home and I can land? And what parent has the capacity for that? What parent's investing in me, right? I mean, I get a lot of parents now who will actually show me their reshares of their kids' TikToks and what they're resharing. So like kids will repost, like one of my daughter's friends, actually, it wasn't my client, but she reposted this TikTok and it was like, when you're a child of divorce and it's Thursday, and it was these big backpacks.
Yeah.
Right, and all these kids with these huge backpacks. And that one really hit me because I was like, she's not just packing her stuff.
Yeah.
She's packing her next personality, right? Who am I at dad's versus who do I get to be at mom's, right? Yeah. And that's one of the things that kids can be really drawn to, because where do I get to just start to be me? And not clients that I've worked with, but my friends' kids and my kids' friends. You know, they'll tell me, like, you know, at dad's house, I'm not allowed to wear socks and sandals because dad doesn't like that look. Or at dad's house, I have to do this because that's what dad does. Or I have to do this. And then I get moms that are like, wow, when they come back to me at 3 days of hell because they've had to put on this show at dad's house and they know that. Right? And that's draining, and that's so hard on a child and their own little minds, and they come to mom and they just explode because all their emotions are allowed there that they weren't allowed to have, right? And then our brain starts to make files. I always tell everyone, your brain's just a big thing of filing cabinets. Like, what information do I have on being here? Because at those ages still, right, we're still reliant on our parent. At 12, I don't have the ability to drive myself to soccer or buy myself supper that I like or whatever. So I have to maintain connection to this adult, my attachment. How do I do that? Okay, well, dad has no capacity for feelings and he likes when I bash mom. So I'm going to go there and do those things, and I'm still going to get to soccer, and he's still going to like me, he's still going to love me, and I'm still going to have Gatorade, right? And then when I get to mom's house, maybe she has a lot more emotional capacity, and I'm just going to erupt, and I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to be all these things because I'm finally allowed to be, right?
Yep.
And then I have to buckle that back up because I'm going back to that place. So we try to really teach kids to understand that their feelings are their own. They're allowed to have them. And it's not because they're too big. It's because that other person doesn't have capacity, right? As long as I'm not being physically harmful, it's about that other person's ability, not me. But at the same time, how do we teach a little human to do that between two different homes that maybe have completely two different standards for emotions, thoughts, feelings? My son's played on hockey teams where the parent said no to hockey, and that kid didn't get to come every other week, right? And it's like, how is this what's happening to this child?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so you could just see, like, you know, they're not going to be at hockey next week.
Yeah.
And everyone's excited. And it's like, yeah, you're probably going to pick to live at dad's house when dad lets you play sports and mom doesn't, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that go into it, but it's also that it doesn't allow them to grow who they are when all they're doing is masking and behaving. But we like to remind parents that all behavior is telling.
Mm-hmm.
Children's behavior are telling you how they're functioning, right? It's communication, and it's sometimes the only language they have because they don't have a front brain yet, right? They can't say, I feel manipulated, right? But they do know that if mom gets a new boyfriend and I tell dad he's ugly, then dad takes me for ice cream. So, right? And then I come back to mom's and I have to hate the boyfriend for the first couple days because I need to make sure I'm still maintaining my loyalty. And then that really upsets mom and we just cycle, right? So just trying to really teach kids to develop their own identity in their own space and having their own emotions rather than just dancing between two houses.
Yeah, I think that's...
why I work with kids.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, as someone who has them myself, and also, well, I sometimes like other people's kids, depending on the kid and the parents. But I think we take a similar approach here where if we can hammer anything into our co-parents, it's that consistency is so important between the households, whether that's financial consistency, emotional consistency, the sports, like all of those things, really design it around the child's experience. And it's something they automatically, because they've found us, that's their shared interest. Their shared interest is the emotional well-being of their kid. So they can get on board pretty quickly. But, I have so much sympathy for them because the reason often that they want to live separately is because they're so disparate on like ideologies about parenting, particularly, whether or not we proceed with a diagnosis or we, kind of education choices, like all of these really big things. And it's so interesting because you want to look at them and be like, well, didn't you talk about this before you got pregnant? But like, I certainly didn't. I just got really, really lucky that we align on, getting a diagnosis and our treatment plan for our son and all of these kind of things. We just got really fortunate that we ended up being aligned in how we approach them. But I think your point to like the real key of consistency is allowing those children space to become who they're supposed to be. And if we can just, keep it light and keep it tight between the two households, then we give them enough room to put their personality in that big giant backpack instead of, all their baggage.
Right. Yeah. And that's just part of it too, is that a lot of times in separation, they are in the idea that like, I no longer have to deal with this person.
Yes.
I get to finally go parent how I want, live how I want, do what I want. And you're not going to tell me anymore that I can't, right? Especially on that avoidant, because all they've ever wanted is autonomy and space. Well, what does a divorce give you, right? So yeah, they can be very much, no, I'm doing it my way. I'm not listening to you anymore. You can do what you want. But then you have to think like, what would it be like for you to grow up in two totally different environments week to week?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can say that, yes, we can have some different rules and we can have some different things, but at the heart of it, right, what is best for this child? And it's going to be that for the most part, it's consistent, or allowing that other parent to show up when it's not their time because that's not what you're good at, right? So if you have a child who has a lot bigger emotions and one parent's better at sitting in them, can that parent come over, right?
To the house? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Or can, do we have to actually just sit at dad's, or sit at mom's and not have that other parent who can really just calm us in that moment, right? Because I like to tell people you might be 50-50, but you're always their parent.
Yeah. That's so
Right?
important. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, we have some couples that come in and they think that on their time, that other parent can't be at any of the sports. It's my time, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
nope.
Yeah.
Right? So if we can really get you to a place where you can say, hey, you know what? I'm not really good at these volleyball tournaments, right? Time management, not my thing. That space, not my thing. That's where mom shines or dad shines, right? Or emotions, I'm not so good. Call your mom. Let's build this together, right? Can we really show up for them?
Do you find that people are able to come together once you've addressed maybe the fear that they're coming into, the responses they typically have? On the other side of that, like, are you seeing that they're able to kind of, like you would in a marriage, my husband and I, we really divide and conquer. Are they dividing and conquering as co-parents?
We have some that are doing like exceptionally well, and I'm like, I wish that we could bring you out and show people what their life looks like, because it's like, yeah, their marriage was trash, right? Like, they would never go back to that, and please don't. But like, on the other side, when you can co-parent like that, it's just unbelievable. And it's so funny because you'll get some people come in, you know, I have seen a lot of like the second relationship, and the new partner is so threatened by the good co-parenting, right? Because they have the idea that like, you should hate them, you shouldn't talk to them, it should be this, it should be that, they should not. And I'm like, actually, you're the problem, right? Like, yeah, because they're turned off by the good co-parenting, and it's a threat because this person isn't gone and you don't hate them. And what do you mean you sit together at soccer?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, why should my child have to look to two different parts of the stands? Right? They score a goal and they can just look up and we're together. That's true co-parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's 2026. Like, we're all so tired. If we can just make the path a little easy and straightforward, we should all be kind of pulling in that direction anyways. But it's an impossible task sometimes, I understand.
Yeah, I'm not saying that everyone's capable of it, and I'm not like, here's the goal for co-parenting coaching with Cass, right? Because sometimes we can't get there, and our nervous system is just too triggered by that person, and it's not in anyone's best interest to sit together at soccer, right? But if we can get to places like that, it's just so much more peace for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, to your point, we have the same exact experience here where we never would, because we don't want to air out anybody's business, but we have so many clients who have successfully separated and are just like really the shining example of life after separation, of parenting after separation. But again, you know, our small part to play in it is to talk about our experience as practitioners, and hopefully they're out there creating hilarious TikToks and doing TikTok dances and whatever it is that's going to let people know that a good amicable separation is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love those co-parenting TikToks where they're like, we co-parented so hard, like he's watching my baby, like from my new relationship, and I'm like,
you're doing it.
Yay, right? And everyone's always like, what? And I'm just like, no, that's actually a good thing, right? Like, yeah, you don't actually have to hate them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. I cannot thank you enough. This was so enlightening. I got to ask all my burning questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I can't wait to hear what you bring for Katie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll see Katie next week, hopefully. So make sure you listen to us.
Yes, I sure will.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Separate Together.
If you like what you hear or think someone else might, please rate and review us and tell your friends to tune in. You can find us at onefamily.